Hey everyone, I'm going to talk about something that I haven't really heard too many sermons about. I've heard maybe one. I didn't really think about it until I heard a sermon on this, but I haven't really read much about it. I haven't really even heard people who criticize the religious comment on this. But I am extremely weird, along with just about every Christian. And the reason for that is because we look at this book for answers. And I myself also go back to some of the lost scriptures as well. And well, starting with this book, the oldest part of this book might have been written maybe 3,000 years ago, maybe even more than that. And the most recent writing in this book was maybe from 1,800 years ago, maybe a bit more recent. And of the lost scriptures, I don't know how old the oldest could be, but the newest was possibly from maybe 1,600 years ago, maybe at the most recent. So I mean, I go back to a bunch of ancient writings for answers. And I follow in the footsteps, or I try to follow in the footsteps of a man who lived 2,000 years ago. So I am really weird to be doing all this. And I also, other Christians don't do this, but I myself also look around at nature and I look within myself and all that for answers. And I do take time reflecting and thinking about things. But still, I am very weird to be going back to this. And I think what makes me especially weird, and what makes other progressive Christians especially weird, is many of us don't even believe in the supernatural deity that this book talks about. I mean, there are different understandings of, basically very different versions of the God of the Bible. But for me, as a pantheist, I find the God of this book, or the many different gods of this book, as God is depicted in so many different ways in this book, I think the God of the Bible, or gods of the Bible really, can be great metaphors, or a great metaphor for nature and the universe, and for what many pantheists, myself included, refer to as God. And I think even though there are some terrible, terrible, terrible things in this book, I'm not going to get into any of it. I think that there's also much wisdom in this book. There's been a lot that's inspired me as a person. And also in the lost scriptures, things like the Gospel of Thomas, or the Gospel of Peter, or the Gospel of Judas, or Acts of Paul and Thecla, and all these other scriptures. And also we live in a post-Darwinian time period where the creation story disproven. We live in a post-Copernican time period where we don't live on this flat Earth and sort of a three-tiered universe. Earth, heaven above, hell below, Earth is the center. And we live in a time period where the Earth revolves around the sun, and the sun is just one of many, many, many suns. It's like off to the side in this one little galaxy that's one of many, 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 many galaxies. And now there are even scientists hypothesizing the multiple universes. And yet I still go back to this? I am extremely effing weird. But even before I became a Christian, I realized that I was already a weird person, so I'm a weird person anyway, with or without this. But something else that I'm going to point out that's kind of weird about me is that if I leave Christianity, the most likely possibilities are that I'll either go back to Judaism or that I'll probably become a Buddhist. Those are the two, what I think are probably the two most likely possibilities of what will happen if I leave Christianity. But then, and some other weird things that I'm going to point out about Christians, this is more about Christians in general, is that when Christians go to church on Sundays, we sing songs about things from this book. We read a few little sections, or someone reads a few little sections from this book. And then when the preacher gives a big speech or a sermon, we don't expect to hear the preacher talk about philosophy or anything like that. We expect the preacher to talk about the few different writings that were read that day from this book. And one of the things that I do want to comment on is that I've also in some ways been speaking inaccurately about this book by referring to it as a book, because it's a collection of different writings from different people who all had different views. It's like the author of Deuteronomy would probably be horrified with some of the things that the author of Jonah talked about, and vice versa. Actually, I don't know. But, I mean, it's like, and then the authors of the 4 different Gospels had very different perspectives. Or at least of Matthew and Luke. These are, like, Matthew had a very orthodox view, and Luke had a very universalist sort of view. And yet, I'm aware of the contradictions in this book. I'm aware of all that. And yet, I still go back to this book for advice on how to live. I am really weird. Thank you for watching. Shalom.